Amira, a devoted wife and mother, thought she had everything under control until Khalid, her charismatic boss, came into her life. What started as a harmless escape from her mundane routine quickly spiraled into a deadly affair, tearing apart her family and exposing dark secrets that no one was prepared for. As the stakes grew higher, Amira's once perfect world crumbled, and the truth behind her betrayal would shatter everything she knew about love, loyalty, and the consequences of her choices. Amira's life seemed to unfold like a picture-perfect dream. A devoted wife to Hassan, a loving mother to their 2 children, and an active member of her local community, she was everything that others admired and envied. Her marriage to Hassan had started like any other young love, shared dreams, and a mutual desire to build a future together. They settled into a quiet suburban neighborhood, surrounded by friendly neighbors, and started a family. Hassan, a hard-working man in his mid-30s, worked as a civil engineer, providing a stable income for their household. He took pride in his work and his family, always striving to be the kind of husband and father that his own had been supportive, reliable, and present. Amira, in her early 30s, dedicated herself to their children and home. She was involved in the local mosque, helping with community events, attending religious gatherings, and supporting other mothers in the neighborhood. She wore her faith proudly, embodying the values of love, respect, and commitment that her family had taught her. From the outside, the couple seemed like the ideal family, Hassan working hard to provide for his family, Amira maintaining the home and raising their children, all while staying deeply connected to her faith. But beneath the surface, something was changing in Amira. She had always been the kind of woman who valued her family above all else, but recently a sense of restlessness had begun to creep into her life. It wasn't that she didn't love Hassan or her children, but she felt increasingly suffocated by the daily routines. Her sense of self seemed to be fading, replaced by the constant demands of motherhood and her role as a wife. She had been a devoted partner, but as the years went on, she began to wonder if there was more to life than the duties she had embraced. A quiet longing began to take root, and for the first time Amira questioned whether she had truly found fulfillment in the life she had chosen. Her days were filled with the usual household chores, school runs, and errands, but there was an emptiness beneath it all that no one could see. While Hassan was supportive and caring, he was also absorbed in his work, and their relationship had started to feel routine. The passion they once shared had slowly faded into the background, replaced by the responsibilities of daily life. Amira's own desires were often set aside, her dreams deferred as she focused on her family. Yet, Amira didn't dare speak of these feelings to anyone, not even to Hassan. The thought of leaving him, or even of suggesting that she needed something more, was unimaginable. She loved him, and she loved their children, but there was an unspoken void inside her. She often found herself daydreaming of what life might be like if she were to step out of the confines of her current world. It wasn't that she didn't appreciate everything she had, she did, but she couldn't help but feel that there was something else out there waiting for her, something she had yet to discover. Little did she know, the opportunity to explore this longing would soon present itself in a way that would change everything. Her life, the life she had worked so hard to build, was about to take a turn she never saw coming. Amira's life took an unexpected turn when she began working part-time at a local accounting firm. At first, it was just a way to keep busy and contribute a little extra income to the household. The work was straightforward filing, scheduling appointments, and assisting with office tasks. She didn't expect much from the job, but it provided a brief respite from her daily routines at home. It was during this time that she met Khalid, her boss, a man whose presence would soon captivate her in a way she hadn't anticipated. Khalid was in his early 40s, well-dressed, and exuded confidence. He was the kind of man who made a lasting impression the moment he entered a room. Intelligent, charismatic, and successful, he was well respected in the office, and his reputation as a sharp businessman had earned him admiration from everyone around him. At first, Amira viewed him simply as a boss, someone she needed to impress in order to keep her job and stay on good terms. But Khalid was different from the men she had known. There was a certain magnetism about him that drew people in, and Amira was no exception. Khalid, for his part, took an immediate interest in her. He recognized her hard work and attention to detail, often praising her for her diligence. Amira was flattered by his compliments, which stood in stark contrast to the lack of recognition she had received at home. Her husband, Hassan, while loving, often took her efforts for granted. Khalid, however, seemed to notice her every move, and that attention made her feel seen in a way she hadn't felt in years. As the days passed, their professional interactions became more frequent. They started spending more time together, discussing work and even sharing personal stories. Khalid confided in Amira about his own struggles, how he was juggling his demanding career with the responsibilities of being a husband and father. He spoke about the pressures of providing for his family and how, at times, it felt like he was losing touch with who he really was. Amira, in turn, began to open up about her own life. She shared the pressures of being a wife and mother, how she often felt overwhelmed by her responsibilities at home, and how lately she had been feeling restless, unsure of her place in the world. Khalid listened intently, offering understanding and support. What started as friendly exchanges slowly evolved into more personal conversations. They began meeting outside of work, first for coffee, then for lunch. Khalid's charm and genuine interest in her made Amira feel valued in a way that she hadn't felt in a long time. She found herself looking forward to their meetings, eager for the chance to talk to him. It wasn't long before the emotional connection between them deepened. They began sharing things that they hadn't confided in anyone else: secrets, desires, regrets. The bond that had formed between them was unlike anything Amira had experienced before. She felt as if Khalid understood her in ways that no one else did, and she was drawn to him in a way she couldn't ignore. Khalid, too, seemed to appreciate her company more than he let on. He often made her laugh, lightening her mood when the weight of her home life felt unbearable. They joked about their families, about their hectic schedules, and about the pressures they both faced. Yet, beneath the surface, something more was stirring. The innocent connection between them began to shift, charged with a subtle tension. The casual touch on her arm, the lingering looks, the quiet moments shared between them, they all seemed to hint at something deeper, something that neither of them had fully acknowledged. Amira, caught in the middle of her growing affection for Khalid and her devotion to her family, struggled to reconcile these new feelings with her sense of loyalty. But the more time she spent with Khalid, the harder it became to ignore the attraction. She told herself that it was just a fleeting connection, a temporary escape from the routine of her life. Yet deep down, she knew that it was something far more dangerous than that. What began as a friendly relationship was slowly morphing into an affair that threatened to change everything. As the affair between Amira and Khalid deepened, the cracks in her seemingly perfect life began to show. At first, it was subtle. Amira found herself becoming distracted at home, her mind constantly drifting back to Khalid. The small moments of excitement they shared, the stolen glances at work, the flirtatious messages exchanged late at night became an addiction, a secret she couldn't let go of. The energy she once put into her home and family slowly began to dissipate, and she found herself making excuses to avoid spending time with Hassan and the children. The guilt she felt at neglecting her family was overwhelming, but the allure of Khalid was too strong to resist. Hassan, though devoted and hard-working, began to notice the changes in Amira. She had become more distant, less engaged in their conversations, and less interested in the day-to-day activities of the family. It wasn't that she had stopped loving him, but she was caught up in a whirlwind of emotions she couldn't control. Her late nights at work were no longer just about completing tasks, they were about finding an excuse to be near Khalid. The rare moments they shared, when Khalid would sneak a quick kiss or hold her hand for a second longer than necessary, filled Amira with an excitement that she hadn't felt in years. It was like a fire had been reignited inside her, a flame that she was unwilling to extinguish. Despite her growing attachment to Khalid, Amira tried to maintain the appearance of a loving wife and mother. She continued to make dinner for her family, help with homework, and attend the occasional social event in their neighborhood. But her heart was no longer fully in it. When Hassan tried to talk to her about her distant behavior, she brushed it off, telling him she was just stressed from work. She wasn't ready to confront the truth of her actions. She wasn't ready to admit that she was no longer the woman she had once been. Khalid, too, seemed to be growing more possessive. What had initially felt like a fun and exciting escape from their respective realities soon turned into something much darker. He began making demands, subtle at first, but unmistakable. He expected Amira to prioritize him above everything else. They spoke more frequently on the phone, and his texts became more urgent, as if he couldn't bear the thought of her slipping away. He wanted her to be with him, and he began talking about their future together. At first, Amira dismissed his comments, telling herself that it was just talk. But the more he mentioned it, the more she began to wonder if Khalid was serious. This emotional manipulation began to take its toll on Amira. She had always been the one to give, to nurture, and to support. But now she found herself questioning everything. Khalid made her feel special, seen, and desired in a way that Hassan no longer did. She wanted to believe that this affair was a temporary escape, a passing phase that would eventually fade, but it didn't. Instead, it deepened with every passing day. The more she gave in to Khalid, the more she found herself losing control of her own life. Her thoughts were consumed by him, and she started to resent the life she had built with Hassan. As Amira's emotional attachment to Khalid grew, so did her guilt. The lies she told her family, the secrets she kept from Hassan, weighed heavily on her. But the fear of losing Khalid, of being exposed, overwhelmed her. The pressure to keep up appearances, to maintain the facade of a perfect family, became unbearable. She began to fear that if she confessed, if she came clean, it would destroy everything. She felt trapped between the life she had known and the passion she had discovered with Khalid. Meanwhile, Hassan continued to grow suspicious. He couldn't quite put his finger on it, but he sensed that something was off. He noticed how Amira's attention drifted during dinner conversations, how her eyes would glaze over when he spoke, as if she wasn't truly listening. He began to wonder if she was seeing someone else, but the thought seemed absurd. Amira had always been so loyal, so devoted. Yet the nagging feeling in his gut wouldn't go away. He couldn't shake the fear that the woman he had built his life with was slipping away, and that he might be powerless to stop it. The tension in their home grew. Amira couldn't continue pretending that everything was normal. The guilt, the lies, and the affair were consuming her, and she knew that the day of reckoning was fast approaching. She could no longer live in the shadows of her own decisions, and the truth, she knew, would eventually come to light. But she wasn't ready to face it yet, and as long as she had Khalid, she thought she could keep going. However, the more she became entwined in the web she had woven, the more dangerous the path ahead became. The point of no return had arrived for Amira. The affair with Khalid, once an escape from the mundane, had turned into a dangerous entanglement, one that she could no longer ignore or control. As much as she tried to hold on to her family and her life as it was, the emotional pull of her relationship with Khalid had become too powerful. Amira had started to question everything she once believed in her loyalty to Hassan, her role as a mother, and her own sense of identity. The affair, once a spark of excitement, had now consumed her. But the realization that Khalid wasn't as committed as she thought began to shake Amira to her core. One evening, after weeks of growing tension between them, Amira confronted Khalid. She had finally come to the heartbreaking conclusion that what they shared was not real. Khalid had been nothing more than a master of emotional manipulation, and Amira was nothing more than another woman in his long list of affairs. As she poured out her feelings to him, hoping for some validation, Khalid's response shattered her. He told her, coldly, that he had never intended to leave his wife for her. The affair had always been a brief fling, a way to relieve stress, nothing more. He had no plans of building a life with her, despite the promises he had made along the way. The truth hit Amira like a slap in the face. All the affection he had shown, all the moments of closeness and intimacy they shared, were now reduced to a hollow betrayal. Khalid's words echoed in her mind, leaving her feeling small, insignificant, and foolish. The anger and heartbreak that consumed her in that moment were overwhelming. She felt humiliated, used, and discarded, as if she had been nothing more than a pawn in Khalid's game. The emotional toll of the affair, combined with the painful reality of Khalid's indifference, pushed her to the brink. She had given so much of herself to him. And for what? In return, she had lost sight of everything she had once held dear: her family, her sense of self, her faith. The guilt of her betrayal toward Hassan weighed heavily on her, but it was the realization that she had been taken for granted that broke her. She was furious at Khalid for deceiving her, but she was equally furious at herself for being so blind. In the days that followed, Amira spiraled into a deep emotional turmoil. She couldn't bring herself to tell Hassan the truth about the affair. She feared that the damage would be too great to repair. But at the same time, she couldn't continue living a lie. Her once happy home felt like a prison, her every action weighed down by the secret she carried. The children, innocent as they were, seemed to sense that something was wrong. Amira couldn't focus on them, couldn't bring herself to be the mother they needed her to be. Her mind was consumed by Khalid, by the painful reality of his betrayal, and by the growing rift between her and her husband. Amira began to feel as though there was no way out. She couldn't go back to the life she had before Khalid. She couldn't pretend that everything was fine with Hassan, knowing the secret she was hiding. And she couldn't bear the thought of living a life without Khalid, even if he had hurt her so deeply. The emotional roller coaster she was on seemed endless, and each day felt like a struggle to keep up appearances while her internal world fell apart. The affair had been her escape, her temporary happiness, but now it had left her more lost and confused than ever. In a moment of despair, Amira began to entertain thoughts she had never considered before. Perhaps, she thought, the only way to truly escape this painful cycle was to start over, but starting over meant abandoning everything: her husband, her children, the life she had worked so hard to build. And yet the idea of walking away, of leaving everything behind, felt strangely freeing. She had nothing left to lose, or so it seemed. As the days passed, Amira found herself becoming more distant from her family, more detached from the life she had once embraced. She couldn't help but wonder if she would ever be able to go back to the woman she had been before Khalid entered her life. It was during this dark period that Amira made a choice, one that would change the course of her life forever. She had reached a point where the pain of her betrayal, combined with the emotional manipulation she had endured, left her with little hope for redemption. She couldn't go back, but she also couldn't move forward without confronting the mess she had made. The pressure of living a double life, torn between the man she loved and the family she had betrayed, became too much to bear. And in her desperation, she began to consider the most extreme solution. She couldn't live with the guilt of what she had done, nor could she continue pretending that everything was okay. The moment of reckoning had arrived, and Amira knew that the path she was about to take would lead her into uncharted territory. Amira's descent into the chaos of her own making took an even darker turn as the weight of her actions began to close in on her. The guilt and self-loathing she had been carrying for months felt like a suffocating fog that threatened to consume everything in its path. Hassan, increasingly suspicious, had begun to ask more pointed questions about her behavior. She found herself growing resentful, angry at the life she had built, angry at the lies she had told, and angry at herself for losing control. Her mind, once clear and focused, had become clouded by her deceit and the crushing pressure of keeping up the charade. The tipping point came one night, when Amira's carefully constructed world shattered completely. Hassan, unable to ignore his growing suspicions any longer, confronted her. He had found a series of messages on her phone, messages from Khalid, messages filled with passion, affection, and promises of a future together. The moment Hassan saw those words, his face drained of color. He didn't need to read them all. The look of shock, pain, and betrayal in his eyes told Amira everything. In that moment, everything she had feared came to life. There was no hiding anymore. The truth was out, and there was no turning back. Hassan was devastated. The man who had trusted her with his heart, his home, and their children was now standing in front of her, shattered by the truth she had kept hidden for so long. His pain was palpable, his voice shaking as he asked her why, how she could betray him in such a way. Amira couldn't find the words to explain, couldn't find a way to justify the choices she had made. She wanted to apologize, to make everything right, but deep down, she knew it was too late. The trust between them had been irreparably broken. Her world, once filled with the illusion of control, now seemed to spin out of control faster than she could catch up with. The conversation between them was filled with raw emotion, anger, tears, regret, and confusion. Hassan demanded to know who Khalid was, what had driven Amira to betray him, but Amira was numb. She couldn't explain the emotions that had taken over her. She couldn't explain why Khalid had seemed so important, why the affair had become a lifeline she couldn't let go of. The truth was, she was lost in her own desires, lost in the rush of being desired by someone who wasn't her husband, lost in the twisted idea that she could find fulfillment outside the family she had built. Hassan, though devastated, was still a man of reason. He tried to hold it together for the sake of their children, but the emotional strain was too much. The days that followed were filled with silence and coldness. Amira attempted to speak to him, to beg for forgiveness, but Hassan could barely look at her without feeling the sting of betrayal. Their once warm home now felt like a battlefield, with Amira trapped in the aftermath of her choices and Hassan caught between the man he thought he knew and the woman who had broken him. Amira's life, once filled with promise and stability, was now unraveling. The affair, which had seemed like an exciting escape, had destroyed everything in its wake. The pain she had caused Hassan, her children, and even herself was more than she could bear. She tried to salvage what was left of her marriage, but the damage was too severe. Khalid, the man she had once trusted and admired, had stopped responding to her messages. His indifference made the reality of her situation even more painful. She had given so much of herself to him, and in the end she was left with nothing but the wreckage of her life. The consequences of her actions became impossible to ignore. Her relationship with Hassan was beyond repair, and their marriage seemed doomed. The once supportive community she had been a part of began to look at her with suspicion, their whispers full of judgment. Amira, who had once been the picture of devotion and family, now felt like a pariah, her reputation destroyed by her own hand. Her children, unaware of the full extent of her betrayal, sensed the change in the air. The joy that had once filled their home was replaced with tension, sadness, and confusion. Amira's world, once so carefully built and maintained, had crumbled in an instant. As Amira sat alone in the silence of her now empty home, she realized the full extent of what she had lost. The affair had been a desperate attempt to find meaning, to reclaim something she felt she had lost, but in the process, she had lost everything that truly mattered. The love and trust of her family, the respect of her community, and the future she had once looked forward to all seemed beyond her reach. She couldn't turn back time, couldn't undo the choices she had made, and couldn't escape the reality of the consequences. In the end, the affair that had started as a fleeting moment of excitement had ended in a devastating loss. Amira was left alone, surrounded by the wreckage of her decisions, realizing that the most dangerous secret she had kept wasn't the affair itself, it was the lies she had told herself, the denial of the life she already had, and the ultimate price of seeking fulfillment at the expense of everything she once held dear.